Greetings and welcome to the Mount Rushmore podcast. My name is Jeff, and I'm joined, as I always am, is my fate to live in eternal quandary and quabble and quibble with Richard.
What?
And Michael.
Howdy.
Richard and Michael, they like to discuss, debate, and deliberate the top four of any given topic. And this week is no different as they discuss the Mount Rushmore of unusual album covers. But wait a minute. You guys aren't debating each other, are you?
No, not this week.
Who are you debating?
We're debating an actual expert in this.
Oh, cool. Expert, are you on the line?
I'm the only one on the line, if that helps anything. I don't know where the expert went, but I'm here.
Well, then tell us your qualifications and give us your name.
Yes, my name is Jim Hanke. I'm the host of a podcast called Vinyl Emergency, which people can listen to however they listen to the Mount Rushmore podcast. And it is a...
Through Victrola! We found the other podcast through Victrola.
Exactly.
It is an interview show, you were saying.
Right, yeah. It is a interview-based show with musicians. I'd say primarily musicians, but also record collectors, friends of mine, people within the music/vinyl industry. But it also extends to... we've had comedians on, other podcast hosts, that sort of thing. And the main deal is that we talk about our connections through the years to vinyl, whether that is only in the past or currently, if they're a big record collector or love the fact that there's this resurgence lately. That's what the show is about. So at times, sometimes we get into nitty gritty stuff about certain pressings or how to best clean records or that sort of stuff. But primarily, it's more about the memories that people are recalling kind of in real time when you bring up, what was your favorite album cover growing up, or where did you go shop for records as a kid, or that sort of thing. So that's been going on since January of 2016. So we just entered our second full year of the show.
Hey, that's great. I'm looking at some of your most, I guess, recent past episodes. Episode 77, Justin Perkins of Mystery Room Mastering and Bash and Pop. What'd you talk to Justin about?
So Justin, as it says, is a mastering engineer in his own right. We talk quite a bit about mastering music for vinyl, which is a little bit of a different process than mastering it technically for CD or iTunes now. And Bash and Pop, the project that he is in, he plays bass, backing up Tommy Stinson from The Replacements.
Oh, wow.
So Bash and Pop came out with an album in 1993 and then went away for about 25 years and then came back last year with a full length. And Tommy, for people might know, he played in the touring. Production isn't the right word, but the touring
version
as it stands of Guns N' Roses for a little bit as well. So Justin is great. It was neat to sit down in his studio and talk about things, some very real things like ear fatigue. Somebody who records bands and masters records. I can't imagine sitting there listening to the same stuff. Being in bands myself for many years. Hearing that constantly, the same notes over and over and over. So talking about how he takes a break to actually listen to vinyl and stuff like that versus, editing digital files. And also, like I said before, just his normal experiences growing up, listening to records that his dad had and what it means to be able to put out music on vinyl currently. But yeah, I've been lucky enough to have Roseanne Cash on the show, Ben Montench from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Ted Leo, Matthew Sweet.
Oh shit! I think I heard that one.
It's really crazy.
That's my favorite.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
That's awesome.
I saw that you had Olivia Chady from O for Rex. That was a great album this last year. Really unexpected.
Yeah, really, really unexpected. And she was super fun because she admitted, even before we started recording, that I unfortunately don't have a lot of connection to vinyl, over the years. She's younger than me. She was very much a CD and digital kid, but it doesn't matter because I get that from a lot of guests that they say, well, I don't know if I have a lot to talk about vinyl. I'm not a record collector or something like that. But we all have memories of that stuff growing up. If you're in a certain age group, you have memories associated with your parents' small record collection or in your small town, where you would go to get records, whether that was the library or the mall or something like that. And she does have a connection to vinyl now. She listens to it with her boyfriend quite often. They really enjoy it. Her records all come out on vinyl. It's very important to her that they do. So those are the kinds of connections too, where if it's not some big long 60-year history with vinyl, it can also be just the essence of loving that the medium exists.
When last season we had an episode called the Mount Rushmore of the 4 albums you listened to as a kid, and no frontin'. And a lot of the memory came back, at least for me, of albums that I remember the cover of so distinctly, like the cover of Musical Youth, with the Pass the Ducci. It's so ingrained in my head, just that image of like the guitar chords sticking out of the trash can. That I have a memory of maybe that song and no other songs, but that the cover is what is like burned into my psyche.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of the thing with the show, I feel, is that there's no slag on digital on the show. I mean, I enjoy music through digital means, certainly. It's how I discover a lot of music, and sometimes I often play stuff digitally to find out if I do want to spend $20, $25, $30 on vinyl to get it. That's not a big deal. I do think artist rights, though, are incredibly questionable with some of these services, where they haven't found out a perfect method yet. We kind of, the technology kind of advanced before we could all find out a good way for everybody to benefit from it. But to what you're talking about, art and covers and what we'll get into today, that's all a big part of the show as well. In a time where liner notes are all but gone from digital streaming services. Artwork continues to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And it's neat, the actual like flesh and blood memories that come back when looking at a cover or holding it or flipping through liner notes. That stuff that it's one of the main reasons people say that they got back into vinyl or never left it. So I think that's a really big part of that. And everybody's got a different story. Somebody might tell you, just like 5 guests before, that the White Album really changed their life, but they're going to tell it to you in a different way. And even if they did, kind of tell the same story, they've had a different career, so we can go many, many different, roads. So it's not always the same conversation about, oh, I grew up on the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. Like that's why I kind of try to talk to people of many different age groups and genres.
Wait, so we don't immediately lose viewers to your much more interesting podcast. Jim, if you're ready, I would love to jump into our podcast, unless Michael wants to say any reason why. I think we've established why it was a compelling suggestion. So
and for the record, I think this is going to...
For the record,
pardon the pun. I think this is going to be slightly album covers, but also album designs of the actual album, physical album itself. I've got one that kind of plays into that. Okay. But, it's a little more of a freewheel. It's the freewheeling Mount Rushmore podcast.
Hey, Richard,
today.
Jeff's the judge. He knows he knows what he's doing.
He does?
And as the judge, I'd like to say, for those of you who came to this podcast looking for vinyl clothing and fetish wear, hang out for a while. See if you like this podcast that we're about to do. You may not, but don't hold it against us. Okay. So these gentlemen have the home field advantage, so they are going to yield the field to our visitor, who is Jim Hanke. That's who you're listening to on the other end here of @VinylEmergency on Twitter. So, Jim, go ahead and pick your first of your 4 Mount Rushmore of unusual album covers.
Wonderful. And this does not have to be, I just want to clarify on the way this is going, this does not have to be from like first to fourth. This is just kind of be which one I want to start out with.
Correct.
Hey, nobody's saying Washington's better than Lincoln.
Okay.
Right.
Well, that's right.
They're all just on there.
That's right.
That's a very good point. Well, let's talk about one that actually I included this because in the email chain with you guys, it was clear that it didn't need to be 45s necessarily or LPs or whatever. It could really be anything within music, whether that would be a CD or maybe something else. I'm putting this out there, and I don't know how familiar you guys are with it, but I even learned a little bit about it.
Did the vinyl guy just start talking about CDs?
Uh-oh.
I did. I did.
Okay.
Going back to digital. No, this
single.
is really... Yeah, the single. Oh, I had plenty of those back in the day, trust me. So the first one I'm going to bring up is from the Flaming Lips. Crazy, how can you say? I mean, this band kind of goes above and beyond, touring-wise. Anything they package up is really usually pretty intricate and crazy. And this one, I would put on Mount Rushmore for packaging. It's the Gummy Song Skull EP. This came out in 2011. It is a limited release of a USB drive, which was placed inside of a brain-shaped gummy, which then was encased in a much larger, probably toddler-size gummy skull.
Wow.
Okay?
Size of a toddler, size a toddler would consume.
No, the size of a toddler's skull.
Oh God.
Like, yeah. So I mean, it's pretty. It's a large thing. And this is a band that has gone. They've put their own blood into releases. They've done some crazy stuff over the years, and some people would say as that stuff kind of increases, their musical output kind of decreases, which that could be an argument certainly. But this Gummy Skull thing, if people look it up, it's really quite crazy. It comes in this square box. You open it up. I guess the first skull, the skull that you got to cut through is like, it's 7 pounds. First of all, this is a 7-pound gummy skull, limited, fully edible and everything, with a 2 gig USB drive stuck inside a brain that's in the gummy skull that's made of it's like cherry, the same thing it's made of. It's like a cherry thing. So you eat you can cut open or eat the pineapple to get to the cherry. These are supposedly limited to 500 skulls a piece, and we talk about sometimes on the show about how limited a release is, if it was limited to 1,000 or 250. So for me to even say limited to 500 skulls sounds very weird.
Yeah.
Right.
But so it was self-released by the band. Not really. Warner Brothers' name is on it, but it's not necessarily official Warner Brothers release. But it was distributed to only a certain amount of select record stores. And it is as I said, a 7-pound gummy skull with a USB port inside, or USB drive inside this brain.
That's ridiculous.
Now I've never seen one of these in person. I've watched YouTube videos of it being like cut open so people could get to the drive, and it really does look like a process. It's not very easy, but it is quite shocking. I mean, this is for digital music. I would say this has got to be one of, if not the craziest ways to present it that I've ever seen. Because we don't normally buy music on memory stick. It's weird to think about going to a show and buying, oh yeah, I got this like thumb drive from this band, and it's got how many ever songs on it. This has only got 4 songs, so it's not even like it was like the entire Flaming Lips discography or anything. It was a 4-song thumb drive. But the rarity of it, the weirdness of it, the presentation where basically you could eat the packaging,
right.
which I guess technically you could do with anything really. It's all paper in general, but this
does
is
seem
do not try to eat the metal box by PIL, by the way. That will give you a bad stomach.
It seems to be something less than a sales stunt. In the past, why these albums have been decorated,
right.
or
even it seems like almost like an anti-sales stunt.
Yeah,
I mean, it wasn't just if I'm remembering a little research on this correctly, they also did a gummy fetus. I believe that's correct.
That's right.
They also did a gummy skull that was marijuana flavored. So I mean, these aren't things that you do when you're trying to sell records. Again, this is a band that put out 4 CDs at the same time that were meant to be played on 4 separate stereo systems in order for you to actually hear the album correctly.
For anybody who's curious too about the worth of something like this, so originally they retailed for $149.99. This gigantic, skull that you maybe either were just going to have on a shelf, or maybe if you did crack it open, you experienced it. On Discogs right now, I mean, the highest that it's ever sold for is $250. So it's not rare enough where this thing is like in the thousands or anything like that, but it's the lowest I think it's ever sold for is $115.
Wow.
So it's one of those things where if you find it, okay, great, but I don't know if it's going to be, completely collecting value.
Or
on
you really
your
need to
shelf.
get like a Homer Simpson out there eating a few of these things to really drive up the value.
Yes, correct.
Or will it even be edible by this point? Or will you?
Yeah,
is it like
that's
the
the thing.
like Tops bubble gum after like 20 years, and you eat it.
Yeah,
and
bite
you
into
die.
this skull, and it's just shards of glass. Yeah.
Well, when these 4 songs are the only things that remain after civilization falls and aliens find us again and they just decide that all of our music was preserved inside these rock hard gummy heads inside these little USB drives. We'll know what's happening.
Well, I'm excited for the band to put a USB drive inside a Twinkie. Then we can finally figure it out.
Yes.
Okay,
Or
gentlemen.
I would say the aliens would be us. Like the aliens would think that like we were all just made of gummy, and that like music was in our heads the entire time.
They wouldn't
just find a bunch of skulls.
Would they be wrong necessarily to think that?
No, not really.
No, not really.
You're right.
All right, guys. Jim just came out swinging with a very amazing choice, and batting first for the home team here is going to be Richard. Richard, what do you got?
All right, so my first one, and when we were kind of discussing what we could do on the show, this is the one of the two that I originally immediately went to, and they're both Warhol ones. This one is the Sticky Fingers album cover for the Rolling Stones. And, the reason I chose this is because I think those Warhol album covers are incredibly iconic, in the way that they used physical media to sort of go beyond just what you would do with an album cover in terms of painting, or even there may be some 3D album art, I think, by that point. Mm-hmm. But this is it was the Warhol playfulness along with sort of moving parts. Yeah. Which I don't know was something you really had a lot previously. So it's fairly iconic. If you haven't seen the original pressing of it, the original pressings at least, it's basically a close-up of a person's trousers. Not Mick Jagger's. We actually don't know whose trousers they are. It's a mystery.
Oh, so mystery pants, huh?
They are mystery pants. And there's an actual metal zipper on it. And when you unzip it, you can see a person's briefs and whatever he's packing under those briefs. And one of the interesting things, this is an example, I think, of an album cover design that was great in principle, but it wasn't really thought out 100%, and it very nearly became a Spinal Tap sort of thing. Because when they first released it to retailers, there were a lot of complaints because it was actually damaging the albums by having this on there. Because where the zipper was kind of popping up when it was being packaged, it was being sent to the record stores just flat, one on top of the other. Mm-hmm. And so the zipper was actually pressing into the grooves of Sister Morphine. So you would all of a sudden Sister Morphine would start skipping really badly because it just had been pressed in. Mm-hmm. So they actually had to go in and tell where they were manufacturing them, whenever the glue is dried on that, just make sure, could you just pull the zipper down a little bit, like halfway? That way it actually went into the center of the record instead of one of the tracks. Mm-hmm. And it turned out that's actually a little bit of a better way to market it as well, because you get just that little bit of the briefs.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So it was all zipped up.
It was all zipped up at first, and they kind of just let it go just a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, it also, that was the album where the Rolling Stones Lips logo was debuted. Yeah. So the Stones were a band that was, especially in the 70s, I think, a band that was very, even going in the late 60s, like their Satanic Majesties has that trippy 3D kind of old 80s baseball card motion
the lenticular
thing. Exactly. So they were another band that was very visual in their presentation.
They understood the power of iconography.
Right, and you could see that in their tours, and you could see that the way they were presented on stage. Mm-hmm. And I think that also played out with the way that they treated their albums. I mean, Jagger was very insistent that they use Warhol for this album. They were kicking around other ideas, and he kind of put his foot down. I like this design, I want this. Yeah. And the guys at Hypnosis, who are this 70s, 80s, they designed a ton of these iconic, very unusual album covers. They were the ones who were kind of stuck trying to figure out, okay, how do I actually make this vision work, right? Andy Warhol and Mick Jagger want a zipper that, pulls down. Yeah. How do you actually do that in manufacturing? So sometimes I think with these albums, we think a lot about the band themselves, and not about the fact there's some poor schlub who actually has to make their vision come to life.
I think of did Sticky Fingers come after Sgt. Pepper? And do you think they might have felt challenged by the incredibly florid album cover that Sgt. Pepper you could lose yourself for a day in the cover of Sgt. Pepper.
I think that their Satanic Majesty's album is the one, and I'd have to sit down and do like I don't remember off the top of my head which one came first.
That feels like the answer to that.
It feels like it's either the answer or that they played off of each other. The Sticky Fingers is kind of when they're getting into their like early to mid 70s sort of, dirty New Orleans style blues thing. So that was sort of, I think, opening up that period of them being almost kind of a grungier type band, not in the musical style sense, but just in their kind of look and feel.
So I should check what I said earlier, because bands like the Rolling Stones were some of the few that had the selling power enough to actually demand some kind of high impact, unusual approach on an album cover. If you were just this regular kind of medium selling band, you couldn't say, I'm going to have a zipper, I'm going to have Andy Warhol design it. You just get what you got.
Oh, right? Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a
picture of 4 of you standing, looking 3 different directions, 15 feet apart. And then there you go.
Yeah. That's one of that's on the Mount Rushmore of album cover, back cover. That's more of a back cover thing. Wouldn't you agree? Or inside the fold. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of the height of the 1970s rock star excess. I think the way the labels treated rock stars in that era, that if Mick Jagger wants Andy Warhol to put together this thing that's going to be, triple the cost of how much it costs to get produced, and we have to go do this thing to make sure it's not ruining the records. Yeah. Well, I guess we'll do it. I mean, there's no way there's no way you could get away with that today.
I think also in the food chain, it is currently, I believe now, but there was a time when an athlete or an actor may have wanted to be a rock star. A rock star may have wanted to be an actor or performer, but all of them were kind of out mystiqued by Andy Warhol. Like, Andy Warhol was a rock star artist who had this kind of Sphinx-like demeanor that even, I think, a guy like Mick Jagger tried to copy, never smiling, never kind of, saying too much. And like Bowie definitely had that.
Or obviously Velvet Underground.
Yeah, the Velvet Underground. So cool. So, Jim, go ahead and give us your second.
All right, number 2. This was on CD. This was on CD and vinyl. This band definitely championed vinyl from a very early part of their career. So I think a lot of people could pick different albums from this band and maybe put it on their own separate Mount Rushmore. But I'm going to go with Vitalogy from Pearl Jam.
Also on our list.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so kind of what you guys were just talking about with the Rolling Stones. Think about, 1971, Sticky Fingers comes out, and, the Stones are obviously one of the biggest bands of the world. I was just thinking as you guys were talking, like, think about the R&D, the research and development that would have to go into putting a zipper on an album cover, and then doing that with how many ever covers they had to do, times the amount of years that have now taken place since that release of that record, and how many reissues, and yada, yada, yada. It's just insane. I can't think of a band in the 90s that was as creatively kind of omnipotent as Pearl Jam was. Not necessarily in their music. I'm a diehard Pearl Jam fan, but their art was always a little bit more intriguing, I think, than maybe what people found in their music. Vitalogy.
I think something interesting about them is that they kind of got out of like the grunge sphere pretty quickly. Like, I know that they were lumped in with Nirvana, and even though the music is so wildly different, and same thing with like Alice in Chains and Soundgarden. Like, I don't know if it was like consciously, but they definitely were like in that sphere. But I think that they were always kind of thinking outside of it in a weird way, and whether that had to do with like their big Ticketmaster thing, I think that they were always kind of a little more conscious of their role.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think bands like Nirvana and stuff were influenced by a lot of punk, but also like I'd say Sonic Youth and some of these like a little bit more art driven bands, whereas I think Pearl Jam it's not, people might disagree, but I think Pearl Jam always kind of wanted to be Fugazi but if like Neil Young wrote Fugazi songs,
right,
is basically like how they wanted to be. And even in like mid-era Pearl Jam, you start to get like, Eddie, when it's a Eddie solo, when he wrote the song himself, like a song like Comatose or some of these other ones that aren't very well loved, you can tell like a major Fugazi, Minor Threat influence there, but yet like clearly, for as early as that band was befriended by Neil Young, they wanted to be, that made them different from Nirvana alone. I mean, they just wanted, there was a little bit more of a heartland kind of thing to Pearl Jam always.
Well,
but
by the way,
go ahead.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that. I was re-listening to some Mike Watt, and his Ball Hogger Tugboat album. And
such a great record.
It's a great record. And basically the conceit of the album is that it's him playing bass, and then they bring in, for every song, basically a different set of drummers, singers, guitarists, etc. And the song that Eddie Vedder sang was a song called Against the 70s, which is essentially about don't buy into like false kind of retro, that if pop culture is trying to push you to kind of think that retro is the way you have to go, don't do that. You need to be able to make your own way.
He was the Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi of rock songs, telling you don't believe in the past.
Yeah, his eyes got really red. He tried to take off Chris Cornell's head with a sword. But I hearing you say that, I find that interesting because they were a band, and I think also to Michael's point, they were a band that definitely had one foot in almost like the classic rock world. In a lot of ways, you mentioned Neil Young. They made an album with Neil Young,
right? And
certainly had an indebtedness to these bands that came before them. And I think when we're talking about the packaging of this album, there's certainly, it harkens back to that. But they're also a band that had a foot in the present or even future, which is where I know Michael and I were talking about the CD release of this and the vinyl release and how that kind of almost was a bridge between these two generations.
Well, it was kind of like what you guys were talking about earlier with kind of giving into a rock star's demands of sorts, because they put out, a 30-something page booklet that was included with the CD, and I think they had like a poster. They had a kind of a bigger, weirder booklet sort of thing with the vinyl edition, and it cost the band $2 million out of their own money to have this printed. Like, they kind of made a deal with the publisher and was like, okay, you guys cover half and we'll cover half, and we'll do this a lot more extravagant thing. And it was interesting to see that a band would eat the own cost of kind of putting out their vision versus passing on, an extra $1 or whatever it was going to cost to the consumer.
Right.
And it seemed to kind of fall into like their kind of mindfulness in terms of like, oh, we're making music and we're not going to charge anybody more for our extravagance.
Right. I mean, this is a band who, clearly they were one of, if not the most popular band in the world when, Vitalogy comes out. But you never had a mainstream band do something like this where you're literally looking at these, it wasn't a 30-page booklet of pictures of the band. It wasn't a 30-page booklet about how each song was written and stuff. It was a 30-page booklet that mirrored this, weird healthcare, manual purchased or published, right before the turn of the century, basically. Eddie found it and wanted to base an album on that. And for people who don't know, if you have Pearl Jam albums and you look in the liner notes and the art direction or the cover or photography or anything like that lists Jerome Turner, that's Eddie Vedder. No one really knows. I personally don't know why he has an alias for some of this stuff, but that's a neat little factoid on Pearl Jam stuff. But yeah, nobody was doing something like this. Even Nirvana, where In Utero was kind of this like crazy picture of a health study, an anatomy kind of like angel thing, and there is crazy artwork out there. But Pearl Jam on their level, kind of like what we were just talking about with the Stones, on their level to invest money of their own to get this made, to see Eddie's vision, because at the time the band wasn't really seeing eye to eye, so I think they kind of shrugged both the music and the art for this record, whereas Eddie kind of like lived and breathed it. It's a remarkable thing to look at it now when you compare to what other records were in the top 10 at this point, and go like, wow, this is like some extraneous, really involved but really interesting art, and yeah, it does translate to vinyl pretty well. One of my biggest scores, I have no idea why, but I was driving by a couple of years ago, a garage sale, and I literally just saw a vinyl copy of Vitalogy. Just one, no record, no like stacks of records, just a copy of Vitalogy on vinyl in this yard sale. So I pulled over. And it's an original copy of Vitalogy for 75 cents. Because they didn't know, what they had or whatever. And it was pretty beat up. I mean, it certainly wasn't like mint or I still got it. I wasn't going to go try to make money off it or anything. I have the vinyl reissue that came out a couple of years ago and the original. So, Pearl Jam being one of my favorite bands, I want to keep both of those things. But, that's just a story where it's like they didn't know what they had. Clearly somebody had moved out and they were like, I don't know what to do with this. Does anybody play records anymore? That sort of thing.
The yard sale mentality is really interesting because throughout like the last couple of weeks when we've been kicking around ideas for what we wanted to talk about, I kept thinking of kind of my roots in comic books. And like the 1990s were just like chock-a-block full of variant edition comic books or special edition embossed or hologram covers. All these different things that like a band or a company would do to try to get you to buy like Wolverine. It's like everyone's already buying Wolverine number 100 or Wolverine 25 or whatever. Like you don't need to do all these extra things, but somehow they like mark a special occasion. And it's so funny to think of like that time that you go to back in my day, I remember going to like, yard sales and just looking to see if like, do they have anything old that I can not take advantage of them, but like take this thing off of that you don't care about that I obviously do. And so like having you go out there and find something that you do care about and seeing it and being like, oh, this is 75 cents. Cool.
Wasn't this one where the CD like packaging itself was like bigger, or you could only get it like in the big like tall box, right?
The Vitalogy was, for whatever reason, it was slightly bigger on one end than the other, and so it wouldn't display like lengthwise. It wouldn't like display on like your shelf if you put it in. You'd have to put it in sideways so you could only see it. It was so strange and so like
you could only see the pages, right? You're right.
Odd.
This feels like if someone wanted to pull like a Wayne coin but didn't quite know how to do it, they would do stuff like, well, let's just make one side a little bit taller than the other. That'll be art, won't it? Yeah, high five.
Yeah, right.
Or like I think one of the liner notes, I think for Corduroy, it just, instead of like song lyrics or anything, it just has a X-ray of Eddie Vedder's teeth.
Yeah,
that feels again like something that's sort of like, you're really stoned and you think this seems like a really great art project thing to do.
It's so close to a Spinal Tap, none more black kind of
right.
So guys, we are now at our halftime. And before we jump in and talk to you about how much we'd like you to download, rate, and review and promote our own podcast, we're going to promote a fellow podcast, and here it goes.
Podcast 42 promo, take one.
Do things pop into your head randomly?
Yes.
Do you want to learn about stuff that happened in history, but nothing that's important in history?
Yes.
Do you want to have everybody laugh at everything you say?
No.
Well,
then become a comedian.
Podcast 42 promo, take two.
Have you ever wanted a podcast to tell you it loves you?
No.
Nor have we at Podcast 42.
Podcast 42 promo, take three.
Don't be sad, be glad. We're here at Podcast 42 to entertain you.
It'll be the brightest hour of your week.
We might make you cry, laugh,
maybe both at the same time.
but we won't make you poop your pants.
Podcast 42 promo, take four. Oh, why don't you guys just give it up already?
And you can find us on all the stuff that you find other podcasts on, all of it. Also find us in our podcast group, the official Podcast 42 group on Facebook, and you can find us on the web at podcast42show.wordpress.com.
Come listen to us. We're Podcast 42.
Podcast 42 show.
Know the email address.
You came up with the email address.
We are podcast42show@gmail.com.
And you couldn't remember that.
And now we're back. And we would like to encourage you to download, rate, and review the Mount Rushmore podcast. But before that, we're going to give you something free. We're going to give you a free trial with our friends at Audible. For the listeners of Mount Rushmore Podcast, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. You might want to try the Rolling Stones' Exile on Main Street, one of the 33 and a third series that I love so much. That is by Bill Janovitz and Robert Fass.
Jeff, I still have a 33 and a third.
Oh, that's right.
In my car. I don't remember who it's.
That's right. The Colin Malloy December is talking.
That's right.
About
I have that. It's still in my glove department.
Yeah.
And, you can ignore that it's like really sun faded from when it was in the back of my 2001 Honda Civic.
My gift to you.
You're welcome.
My gift to you. And maybe Felix will chew on it. With this Audible trial, you can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/Rushmore. With over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/Rushmore. Again, that's audibletrial.com/Rushmore. And guys, come on, go to iTunes, download, rate, and review all the Mount Rushmore podcast episodes. But more importantly, join us, be part of the community, as Jim Hanke is now part of the community, by going to our Facebook page and suggesting future episode subjects, by commenting on the episodes that we've created. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Mount Rushmore Podcast.
We love when you guys comment and tell us how we're wrong about a certain topic, and then I love deleting those comments.
Yeah. And, of course, one really cool destination for you out on the interwebs is vinylemergency.com. You can go there and see the list of all the different episodes that have taken place and the amazing participants in this podcast. Roseanne Cash, Dave Porter, Ben Montench, Brian Stack, improviser from Second City, also on Late Show with Stephen Colbert and Conan, Ted Leo, Without Pharmacists, Matthew Sweet, Jimmy Pardo, all kinds of great people talking to this really mensch of a dude, Jim Hanke, about vinyl.
Hey everyone, my name is Jim Hanke and I'm the host of Vinyl Emergency, a podcast where musicians, producers, comedians, and those who dream up, press, release, or collect vinyl records discuss their relationship with the medium today as well as in their formative youth. Artwork that has stood the test of time, neighborhood record stores we remember, the first albums we ever bought, vinyl's warmth and sound. The tangible object of a vinyl record can bring forth so many intangible memories, and that's what we try to capture on the show. Guests have included Roseanne Cash, Ben Montench of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Brian Stack from Conan and the Late Show with Stephen Colbert, Ted Leo, Lily Hyatt, and Dave Porter of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. We've been known to do an episode or two in front of a live audience as well, and we also talk to everyday record collectors about what drives their passion. We even have episodes dedicated to the processes of mastering for vinyl, properly cleaning your records, the feeling of standing in line for hours on record store day, and much more. Tune into Vinyl Emergency however you get your podcasts. Visit us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Vinyl Emergency, or stop by our website, vinylemergency.com.
All right, Richard. All right, Michael. Who's going to take on Jim? Because he's totally, right now, he's kicking your butt.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
Well, we both had the same one on the last one, but I'll start off. Our next pick is 1979's In Through the Outdoor by Led Zeppelin. And the packaging for this album, it had a bunch of different pieces. The first part was it was encased in kind of like this brown paper bag, as if it looked kind of like a bootleg, and it just had like this like a stamp on it. It just you didn't really know what it was when you walked out of the album shop. The album shop? The record store.
What are you
Albums! Get your albums here! Hi, Mr. Simpson. What do you want? Can I slice you of a fresh slice of vinyl?
A fresh slice of album, please.
Maybe you're making movies by a Dire Straits. How would you like it, kid?
The second part of the album was that it had like a black and white image on the inside. And
Michael Jackson from Smooth Criminal.
That's right. And there was anything special about that until you got it wet, and then it became colorized. It had like this kind of weird colorization, like from like an old children's book, that would kind of permanently
would recolor it,
which is like
insane. It's insane.
Well, would you be like walking out in the rain and then it happened? Would you accidentally spill something and then it happened? And like it's amazing to think that they were so interested in like the transformation process and like the tactileness of like having an album of just like, oh, you gotta transform it, you gotta do something to it other than just take it out and put it on the turntable.
And the idea that, for me, it's the idea, like you said, that somehow you have to figure this out.
Yeah.
So either you somehow accidentally get your album wet, which I'm pretty sure is bad.
Yeah.
To do
As
that.
we learned from Gremlins, right?
Right. Your album will start multiplying.
Yeah,
turns into
don't get Led Zeppelin wet after midnight, I guess is the...
Do not feed them after midnight, I can definitely tell you that. So either you accidentally got it wet, and that's a problem, or like I guess somebody else had to tell somebody else, like one person figured it out, and then this is, I guess this is the difference between now and, the 1970s. Now it would just be within like an hour of it being released, it would be, everyone would be talking about it on Twitter, and it would just be sort of this, hey, cool thing, boom, done. They'd probably even mention it like in the press release for it. Here, I'm sure eventually stories were written about it and you kind of figure it out there. But there had to be this sort of like word of mouth about it, where like some guy was the first guy in your high school who figured this out, and he was like the badass for the rest of the month because
he was the guy that cried all the time.
Oh yeah, they just beat him up anyway, even though he figured it out. And
that's how
the tears are what made it happen. I get it.
Do you think hypnosis actually says, here's something you could do, here's something you can waste $1 million on?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I mean, hypnosis, I incorrectly said hypnosis did the first album I talked about. They did not, but they did do this one. And they did a lot of those like Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin-y type, like 70s and 80s, sort of a lot of prog rock and kind of big classic rock type stuff. I wonder if they did or didn't. I know they would often pitch bands with certain ideas. I may have told this story on the show once, but the band XTC, for their album Go 2, they went to go visit Hypnosis, and they had a bunch of these off-the-wall weird things they were throwing at them, and they didn't like it, and it was a very uncomfortable meeting. They're kind of getting ready to leave, sort of like trying to figure out how do we extract ourselves politely from this without having to use any of these. And they see an album up on the mantle that's just a black, and it's got a bunch of white text on it. And they go, oh, well, what's that? And the guys at Hypnosis sort of go, well, that's sort of The Office. We've had it up there forever. Nobody ever wants it. And it was this white text on black background just says, this is an album cover. The purpose of an album cover is to get you to be more interested in it. Yeah. And it just fills up this whole, it fills up, I think, certainly the front cover. And they immediately said, yeah, great, we'll take it. And so it was like the Office joke, and then they went and bought it, and I think it's become a fairly iconic, at least within their catalog album. So Hypnosis, I know, they would pitch bands specifically, but they were also a smaller band at the time. I would think a band like Led Zeppelin probably came into this with some pretty specific ideas of what they wanted to do, but I don't know.
Yeah. So that's a fun poll. All right. So Jim, what do you got?
Okay, I'm going to go back towards the modern age here a little bit and talk about a guy who I think we always need to talk about when we talk about design and vinyl these days, and that would be Jack White. I'm choosing Lazaretto, his second album.
That is also
from couple
on our list. Yeah.
Okay, well, this is
great minds think alike.
Great minds think alike. So I wanted to, get this list of everything that's on the Lazaretto pressing, because I think what's really neat with this is not so much all the bells and whistles, but Third Man, his record label, has been known for doing, tricolor records, really crazy pressings of other stuff, but always limited to a certain amount. The reason why this Lazaretto Ultra, what they call is the Lazaretto Ultra LP, is so cool is it's because it's the standard Lazaretto pressing that you can buy in any record store. So anybody who just, if you're an 11-year-old kid and you're a fan of Jack White, this is the album that you got. And maybe that starts kids down a path of being interested in vinyl records again. I think that's really cool, but it means a lot to me that this record was not some $3,000, high end, you had to, step over your dead grandmother to get it kind of thing. This is just available to everybody. So this is a list of the things that were on the Lazaretto LP. So there are 2 vinyl only hidden tracks beneath the center labels. Now, it's not super great to play, to put your stylus down on paper that has to go through to the grooves. So that kind of sucks, but one of the hidden tracks plays at 78 revolutions per minute, one plays at 45, and the whole rest of the album plays at 33. So this actually is a 3-speed record, which is incredibly rare too. That very rarely happens. Side A on Lazaretto plays from the inside out rather than the outside in. So you put your needle as close to the label as you can for side A, and it plays out, which that's not like the most... Other acts have done that. I think Monty Python did it at one point. They also did a locked groove thing, which we'll talk about in a second. But that's something new to a lot of people who aren't familiar with records that have done that before. The dual, like the locked groove thing. So the dual groove technology that I wanted to point out too was that on I think it's side B. It starts off with the track Just One Drink, and depending on where you drop the needle at the beginning of side B, it either plays an electric intro to that song or an acoustic intro for that song. So you'll have to like get it exactly queued up to play the version that you want to play, but it eventually just goes into the same song. There's a matte finish on side B to kind of give it a look like it looks like a 78 RPM record. There are locked grooves on both sides. The locked groove is basically meaning your record, when you put on a vinyl record and it goes to the end of it and you just have the silence, that is a locked groove at the end, because you'll notice that the needle never gets as far as your actual center label. So it's a silent locked groove. This is a locked groove with music on it. So it's just this never-ending soundscape, so to speak, within that locked groove. It is... there's a hologram.
We're not talking about album covers anymore.
No. What I like
we're
about
getting into the design one that I mentioned. Yeah.
What I like about this, it feels like Jack White was. It's like the equivalent of going on like Pimp My Ride, and it was just like give me everything that you could do to an album. I want to do everything on one LP. Can you make it play 3 speeds? Oh yeah.
Oh, we could do that.
Can you do a hologram? Oh, we can do a hologram. Can you do Can you do this crazy locked groove thing?
Sure.
Yep, we can do it.
Do you think Jack White's now at a point where he just is really regretting the fact that he keeps one? He did this the one time, and now he has to keep one-upping himself. Yeah. You think like for the next album or whatever release that he just wants to do like on one of those flexi 45s that you get sometimes in Mad Magazine or something like that.
Back a honeycomb.
Yeah. Where you need the Where's the Captain single from Rick Derringer, where you'd have to put like a coin down in the middle of it so it had enough weight to actually be played. Mm-hmm. You think he just wants to do something like that now? Like, sure, that'll be good.
Oh, so I cut you off, Jim. What else were you going to say?
Oh no, I mean seriously, we'll be here all night talking about all the bells and whistles on this thing. But I mean that's a big list of stuff on, and to your point, like on one LP, this is stuff he could have saved up and done throughout the remainder of his career. So this when you buy it in the store, it doesn't look any different than any other record out there. This is a little bit more about the actual record itself. I felt that with him being such an icon in vinyl currently, that it needed to be included. And he's got other ones. I mean, plenty of other stuff that's come out that you mentioned the little Flexi 45s. One year for Record Store Day, I believe he put a bunch of those in balloons, and then just let them go, and then people around the country found these. And then there was like a note like, hey, take a picture and send it to whatever, so that they could like actually map out where all these flexis kind of came into. And we let out 20 flexis, and it's like, how rare is that? It's crazy.
So he went and did my science fair project from 4th grade.
Yes,
that's what you're saying.
Essentially. And a lot of
that's
people,
actually the Sri Lanka space program. I think has the same
same concept.
A lot of people what?
Well, I think that a lot of people rag on him because it's gimmicky to them. It seems like a gimmick. And the thing is that I think a gimmick is like, the way I think of that would be if somebody desperately wanted you to buy their music and was trying to, like, think of any relatively creative flash in the pan way to get it to you. And that's my definition of something being gimmicky. Jack truly, I think, has a love for this stuff and wants to see more vinyl out in the world. I mean, he just opened another plant not too long ago in Detroit, which will hopefully alleviate some of the backup that's happened at United Record Pressing in Nashville, which they use quite a bit. Third Man does. I love this kind of stuff. I can't say that I'm in for all of it. I mean, there's some stuff where, depending on the music or depending on, what's actually done with the record, it's kind of like, blah. But this specifically, I think, of all the stuff he's done, this is the most remarkable to me because it's the most, like, mass consumed product on vinyl that he's put out.
Well, it's
that anybody can kind of experience.
I think it's the greatest selling vinyl, at least of the SoundScan era, if I remember reading this.
Yeah.
That it broke the record from Vitalogy.
Yeah.
Oddly enough.
Mm-hmm. That was interesting. Yeah.
Yes, but I had the list here. This was my choice between the two of Michael and I, and I knew we needed to talk about Jack White because, as you said, I mean, I personally think he skirts that sort of border between gimmicky and not gimmicky. But I think he does it from a position of wanting people to be more interested in vinyl and go out and say, well, if I'm going to get this, vinyl from Jack White, maybe I'll also pick up a couple of other vinyls and get more interested in it through that. Like the 16 Saltine single, which was filled with liquid, which did start leaking occasionally, which is hopefully leaked onto the Led Zeppelin cover, that it could be all set. He released a 3 RPM record, which actually, that one was a little gimmicky. That one, I watched a video of him playing it, and I think he had a look on his face that looked a little bit like he was trying to get away with something, just slightly. And then he had a triple decker record, which there's also a video of him showing this one off, and this one I think this is one where I think he legitimately thinks this is a coolest shit thing, because it was a larger record that had I guess it was a 33, but it only played one song, and then it had a 78 inside of it where the center groove, or where the center would be, and then you could actually crack open the main album and get a hidden 78 out of that.
Right.
And it's this thing where he's like, when he's showing off, he's like, well, I guess you need like a screwdriver or a Swiss Army knife or something to do this. I'm like, well, maybe you should have put a tool in there. If you're going to ask people to crack open your album.
That's when IKEA releases albums.
Everything is just done with a little...
just unlock it.
Yeah. No, but Jack White, I think... Look, he loves, like you said, he loves vinyl. I think it's something that his fans now have grown to expect from him. I think if he ever got to the point where he didn't do something like this, it would be seen as a huge disappointment. I do wonder if maybe the first time that something like this happened was just some sort of mistake. Like they accidentally had some sort of lock groove situation, and he was just stubborn about it. No, I meant to do that. No, that was totally like a thing I meant to do, and I'm going to do it again on the next album, even more. And he's just kind of got stuck in it now.
Right. He kind of. Have you guys seen Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story?
Oh, of course.
Well, it's like, I mean, maybe there's a part of the Elvis that Jack White played in that movie that's actually kind of Jack White.
Yeah.
Like, hey man, one thing you need to know about me, I'm the king.
Right.
That sort of thing. I think there's one thing that I think is really cool. I know we got to get to our next thing, but one thing I like to give him props for is the world's fastest record, which is actually talking about the quickness in which he recorded it and had it pressed. I think a couple of years ago for Record Store Day, speaking of Elvis, he did an Elvis song for the B-side, but he did a 45 recorded live at Third Man in Nashville. They drove it to United Record Press immediately, and they pressed it within 3 to 4 hours, and then they brought them all back, and everybody who was hanging out at Third Man could get one. And that's a big rarity, and I think that's a really cool idea for like, the immediacy of it. He can record direct to wax in this store, in this, like performance area that they have in the store, the Blue Room. They can go get it done at United. They get it back, and it's, relatively quick, and, I'm sure I'm sure that took a lot of work, but it seems so quick and easy. And that's Jack White, obviously. A band touring Nashville and goes, "Hey, we want to record today," and then have it out today. That's not going to happen. But I really like that idea too, and I feel like it's only gimmicky if you don't like the output. If you really enjoy the music itself, you don't find it gimmicky. You find it exciting. So I think, whenever anyone calls it gimmicky, you can kind of tell they're not really a Jack White or a White Stripes fan. And I'm not all the time either, but I just really admire his tenacity for this stuff.
Jim,
I do.
More. Yeah.
Oh, boy. Okay. So speaking of liquid filled, I'm going to go that route here, and this would be, again, kind of like talking about the vinyl itself, but one that has been super, super hard to come by and talked about in the vinyl communities. It is from Waxwork Records, a label that does mainly horror scores. They just did the Babadook, and I think The Thing came out quite a bit. And those guys have really, really great packaging. But this is the score for the original Friday the 13th from Harry Manfredini. This was created by a album designer named Curtis Godino, who I've been trying to get on the show for a while. I think he'd be a really interesting guy to talk to. He's kind of like a visual artist who kind of connected with Waxwork to make something really unique. So it is a blood / like liquid filled clear LP that was supposed to be limited to 100 copies. Limited actually to 75 because 25 were damaged in the original shipping. There's a story, I got to interview Kevin from Waxwork a while back, and he mentioned that their office is like above some other office. I don't know if it's a doctor's office or something like that. And the original 25 that were delivered that were damaged, think about this. You got a heavy box of vinyl. If you guys have carried any more than 10, 12 records at a time, that vinyl can get really heavy. So it's this heavy box outside a door of a business that looks like there is blood seeping from the bottom of this box. And thankfully they brought it to Waxwork. We're like, we think this is yours, but what the hell is in this, sort of thing. I was going
to say, I would imagine that the FedEx driver was like not super happy about that
right,
shipment.
Yeah, exactly. So this is really limited to about under 75 copies. For them to do 100 run of this, it is very, very hard to get on the secondary market. There's one currently for sale on Discogs for $800.
Whoa.
The highest it's sold for on Discogs, this is not eBay obviously, but at least on Discogs, it's sold for about $1,040. That's the highest this one album has sold for. So I'm going with rarity. I'm going with kind of coolness. I'm going with the fact that it garners a lot of money when it is available. It's probably Waxwork's most popular release, even though it's one of the most limited. If you can find this thing, it is a real gem, and especially when the lowest it's ever sold for on Discogs is $400. I mean, if you are a collector, this is something you'll always be after. And it's the original Friday the 13th. The cover of it is really cool. There's no Jason on it. It's just like this close up of an eye. It looks very like a Mondo kind of, poster. It's really awesome. But I think that one would need to be up there. I realize that I haven't really talked about much previous to like 1994 or something, but truly these are ones that I think would continue to stand the test of time within like the current vinyl schematic that we have going today.
I like this one because there's a logical connection between what the functionality of what the album is and sort of like design of it. It makes sense that the Friday the 13th, soundtrack album would be blood filled.
Yes.
Yeah.
It doesn't make as much sense when it's, to get back to the Flaming Lips.
Yeah.
And they do a collaborative album and they ask Yoko Ono or Keisha to donate some blood to be put into the album. That to me just feels that feels like, again, Wayne Coyne trying to do something artsy for artsy's sake.
Yeah.
That on the other hand, the Friday the 13th re-release seems cool because of that. Although I hope they have better packaging than Jack White did for his liquid-filled ones, again, because that's kind of a messy mistake to make. So,
right.
But no, this is a really good pick.
Well, so gentlemen, I think we've had each of our 4 choices, and 2 of them overlapped. And you did state that we have a little bit of a problem, Jim, and I'm going to solve that problem because the Borglum bag is something that the host and judge of the Mount Rushmore podcast gets to hold on to. And inside that bag, named after the Mount Rushmore monument designer Gutzon Borglum, inside that bag is a choice that I have is my trump card, if I choose to use it, that will override any choices that are made by our contestants and then therefore give me a point. And inside that bag is from 1966, the Beatles Yesterday and Today, an American album released of cutouts from Beatles albums that were being released overseas. And the photography on the album was by a gentleman named Robert Whittaker. And Robert Whittaker was sent to photograph these young lads, and he had toured with them. He had seen the type of deities that they were treated with, the adulation that they were treated with, and he wanted to disrupt that identity in the set of photography, in this photo shoot that he had planned for them. This photo shoot was never intended to be an album cover, but it did, I think, in that the Beatles, Paul and John and George
and the
other one were interested in contemporary art. They were interested in in Broadway plays, in novels, in science fiction, and all these different things, things that were challenging the status quo. Even though they were presented as the 4 lovable mop-top lads from Liverpool, they were interested in playing with their image. And so the Beatles Yesterday and Today was released originally in the United States with what is now known as the Butcher album cover, which is just the 4 lads holding up chopped up bits of meat and baby doll heads that are severed off and the bodies of the babies that are covered in blood. And so that caused a huge furor, and it is now a very valuable album cover today. If you have one, you may have it in different states. The state in which it was pasted over with a more acceptable photo of them just kind of sitting there in their suits. But what I love about it is I love the Beatles, and I know that the Beatles were trapped being the Beatles, and that they had interests that were very much varied and very contemporary. But like the Beach Boys or some other acts, they got kind of trapped in this kind of bubblegum identity and saw this as a way to kind of break out of it. But then, boy, howdy, they were chastised.
And then I like this. I like this because you mentioned, especially Paul was really into pop art at the time. And this comes out in 66, 65. So this is right around the time where suddenly they're going from, like you said, the album covers of just the 4 of them kind of looking out a door or whatever it happened to be, to, you get to from here to the Revolver album cover, then to Sgt. Pepper. Then to even something like the White Album, which in its own way is very pop art to just not have anything on it. So this is, I think this wound up being sort of that first pushback they had, like you said, to their image, and then you can kind of track after that where they took more control over the packaging and the way that the actual physical albums themselves were released.
That's right.
We didn't mention, by the way, I do enjoy album covers. I didn't pick any. Jim didn't pick any, or Michael didn't pick any that have things that you can do with them.
Oh,
like the Jethro Tull album cover for "Thick as a Brick," which
are you talking about separating the twigs from the seeds of your marijuana?
Yes, that's exactly. No, that's
you can do that with any album cover. Or a Frisbee.
That's the Cheech and Chong album cover. No, it actually had an 8-page newspaper in there, like you would have wrapped around fish and chips.
Oh, cool.
With little fake BBC channel ads and really naughty connect the dots. I mentioned XTC. They had one for their No Thugs in Our House EP that was actually like a cardboard cutout. You could cut out like a little stage.
Oh, cool.
And they had cardboard cutouts, all the characters in the song, and you could put on little kind of puppet show doing that. I love that idea, too. I wish more... that's one thing that we don't get anymore, but not having these albums is the ability to be playful with that.
Yeah. I guess an MP3 could have a PDF attached to it. Hey, print this.
Not quite as exciting, no.
I was going to mention Ryan Adams had if you're a big Ryan Adams fan, he had a 7-inch box set of his newest album, Prisoner. So it's the album Prisoner on side of all the A-sides of these, how many ever, 45s are in there, 12, 13, I forget. And then there's B-sides for each one, so you get, how many ever, 13 or 14 new Ryan Adams songs. But then the set is actually it's like a play set where you open it up. There are cutouts of Ryan and his band, as well as like the stuffed tiger that's always on stage when they play, or the arcade game that's like behind Ryan, or like whatever. So it's like you can like fold it out. It's basically the Hollywood sign that says prisoner or whatever, but you fold it out and it's like a stage layout and stuff. And I'm a huge Ryan Adams fan for sure, but I also already have Prisoner on LP. Am I really going to play or use these 13, 12, 13, 7 inches, and whatever, I don't know. But that's to your point. I mean, I thought that was a really cool thing too, of like, just the interactivity with stuff. There's plenty of records. A band called Menomina out of Seattle, they had an album called Friend and Foe, where you could kind of like spin this piece that was inside the record, and they had little die cut holes throughout it. So like the more you spun it, like it said a different thing in each one of these holes. I mean, there's plenty of stuff people have done. I really liked your guys' suggestions. I think Yesterday and Today is perfect. That was kind of haunting around my list, but I also figured that maybe you guys would touch on it too. The lengths that people went to redo that cover, I think that alone makes it one necessary for the Mount Rushmore of album design, because people still to this day wonder whether they have a true covered up Yesterday and Today, and they try to like take the original cover off to see what's behind it, or you find it in all shapes and sizes. The original Yesterday and Today to it could be really water damaged, or maybe it's in mint condition or whatever. It's always something that people will be hunting for, I still think, for like the next 50 years. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. So I grew up originally with my parents' old vinyl, then purchased my own 45s and albums all up through college, actually, buying cassettes along the way, and then CDs. Have you spent your whole life with all of those formats, or did they come along? Okay.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I started out. I mean, quite honestly, the story goes, I started out, growing up around vinyl in my parents' house as a kid. I mean, they raised me well on Roy Orbison, Creedence Clearwater Revival, the Beach Boys, Patsy Cline, that sort of stuff. I definitely did toy around with their gigantic, one of those big wood stereo systems that takes 15 people to lift and whatever. That's got little everything on it. There was an 8-track player in there, so I remember playing 8 tracks through there when I was a kid too. I definitely hopped on the CD revolution. Always kind of was interested in vinyl, but it really wasn't until I believe the Christmas of 2010. So really only like 7-8 years ago, where my wife said, you're a music lover. You appreciate art. You appreciate the stories behind albums. Why not kind of give vinyl a try as far as getting into it? And lo and behold, that's kind of where we are today. I always loved it. I had 7 inches and 10 inches and LPs from the punk emo bands that I was listening to in the 90s and early 2000s, but I just kind of like never really devoted much time to it, other than like buying it as a novelty that I would listen to a couple times. And now it's kind of become this whole other beast. And I'm really thankful for that. But yeah, I mean, I never shy away from any format. I personally, this is just me talking, I personally don't really understand or get the cassette renaissance that we're kind of having now. Hipster bullshit. Yeah, right. I don't really get that. But I don't discredit anybody for having a love for a physical thing that represents your love for something. Like, I was watching this new Netflix series, I don't know if you guys have seen, called The Toys That Made Us.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Star Wars episode. Yeah.
Really, yeah. So in that Star Wars episode, one of the I don't know if he's a professor or something like that. He has this really nice kind of statement about the physical things that represent what we believe in. And, we use iconography in religion to represent beliefs if we have them. The flag represents a certain amount of freedom, or, what the pride we have in our country or something like that. And he was using it to describe toys, as in like, hey, this represents these Star Wars things represent my devotion to this. And it truly, I mean, if you take the word toys out of it, anything he said during that little run about the physical manifestation of our love for things could be said about vinyl. I even showed it to a couple friends. I said, this is what you should say to somebody when they ask, well, why vinyl? It's like, well, it physically represents your love of something or memories of something, right? I mean, that's kind of what it's all about.
I'm personally waiting for the 8-track renaissance because I love listening to songs and having it click in the middle of the song because they can't fit enough song into one track.
Right.
That's always
they fade
plus. A plus, guys.
Well, I remember they always faded. I forget which album. I think whatever album Ramble On is on from Led Zeppelin, but specifically they fade out Ramble On like in the middle of the song. It's like, it fades out, clicks, and then it kind of like comes back up. It's like, man, I mean,
of all the choices, right? Yeah.
Of all the choices, right? You're like literally not enjoying the song anymore. So it's crazy.
All right, guys. So now is the time where I get to evaluate the statements that have been made before the judge and then assign which choices will be etched permanently, permanently up onto the Mount Rushmore of unusual album covers. Why don't I just start out with the ones that you both chose, because they were compelling choices both for each of those. So you'll each get a point for Vitalogy, Pearl Jam, Lazaretto, Jack White. So congratulations to you both. And then, golf clap. And now, for the Friday the 13th trippy ass Harry Manfredino
I don't know him.
album. I don't
Not
know.
related to him at all.
You don't think so?
I don't know the guy.
I'm going to call you little Harry Manfredino.
Hey, that's between me and my wife. Okay.
Oh, he just pulled out his Manfredino. Oh my God, put it back. It's too hairy. And so that gets a point, and of course you are the recipient, Jim, for that. And I would also love to see this in person someday, but I can only right now enjoy your description of it, the Gummy Song Skull from Flaming Lips. So, Jim, you get a point for that.
Holy crap.
Yeah. So in that, Michael and Richard have to really split these 2 points and each have 1 point, and then you have yourself 2 points. You are clearly the victor, Jim Hanke.
Oh, thank you.
That's right. So, folks, whenever you have a vinyl emergency or want to create one, there's this amazing place you can go, vinylemergency.com, to see all the different places out on social media, the Facebook, the Twitter, and Instagram, where Jim shares his love for vinyl and your ability to connect to the podcast where it exists on SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Apple iTunes. So, Jim, want to thank you so much for educating us with your knowledge.
This is great. This is fantastic.
Well, I tried. Thank you so much, guys. I actually learned quite a bit from you guys as well. This has been really fun, and thanks so much for having me on.
All right. And this has been the Mount Rushmore podcast. I, as always, am Jeff.
I'm Richard.
I'm Michael.
And say bye-bye, Jim.
Bye.